dogs are crazy, apparently. I'm the membership and leadership development director. I tried to say communications. I'm sorry, Phil. I'm trying to take back over, apparently. And in this job, there's a lot of fun things that we talk about. One of which seems to come up regularly, and that is how our history and traditions are still a part of Grange today and their relevance, and exactly why we still do some of the things that we do, and how we can balance in kind of a society that's very different than it was back in the day. And so I know a lot of you here and I have had these conversations. And in fact, one or two of you I know were part of the conversations as I was thinking about and developing out some of the programming we put out a little over a year ago with the heirloom programs. And so this is not unusual, that these are discussions that we have. But I think that there's a deeper thing that I wanted to start with tonight. And that was a question for most of you, which is, how often do you have discussions with folks who are looking at our ritual and asking where it's relevant and how it can be either more useful or more appealing in today's society? See, this is where the cameras come in handy. Nobody's raising their hand. Nobody's had those discussions. Everybody's afraid of coming to you and talking to you about that. All right, Rob's had it.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I went to a Grange the other night and we were talking about ritual, and it was interesting because we have a couple of Granges around, including this one, where, some people are kind of put off by the traditional ritual. And I said, you have the alternate ritual, which is a little simplified. If it's done well and it doesn't take that long to learn it, it can be done quickly. As a matter of fact, in my column for the next Connecticut Granger, I do speak on the issue of using the ritual and the order of business to keep meetings on track, because I'm hearing from a lot of Granges that their meetings go on and on and on, and they just have lack of structure. And I have felt for a long time that the ritual, opening and closing, define the beginning and the end, and the order of business keeps you on track and on a schedule. And I strongly believe in some sort of ritual, opening, order of business, and closing. And I'm trying to push that. And that's why I wrote a good bit of a paragraph for my next article in the Granger, Connecticut Granger.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Anybody
I don't
else?
have my, I don't have my face on there, but
That's
I don't
okay.
know how. It's just weird. But I got a note today from another Grange in Maine who are calling themselves the alternative Grange. And when I became the president of our Grange, some of the people who've been there for a while were not happy, because I found that with so many new members that we have, that having, like Robert said, the meetings go on forever and ever. Doing the alternative with the beginning and the end, and explaining and going through the ritual, it's been very effective, but shorter doses than what was happening before, via the alternative opening and closing. And so anyway, it's working much better for us.
Okay. And the alternative Grange, is that a Grange by itself, a standalone, or is that just what you guys are kind of referring to your Grange as?
No, we weren't referring to, another Grange was. And
Okay.
what they did was, they're just using the alternative in the 2013 book. You can either the long version or the alternative version.
Yep.
And the alternative version is more just simple, and it's easier to bringing people. We're in Maine and Freeport, and it's kind of urban.
Okay.
So everybody's into gardening and stuff. So it's not like we're coming in with long-term farmers and stuff,
Sure.
but people are enthusiastic about our Grange. So, and the
Nice.
alternative one helps.
Nice. Okay.
Years ago
that's-
in Connecticut, we called for some reason those that used the alternative opening and closing community granges to set them aside from the rest of the subordinate granges. They
Yeah,
had,
we don't do that in Maine.
uh,
and it was certainly an option that they could use either subordinate Grange or community Grange. So maybe the state Grange itself just kind of chose the designation so they knew what they were walking into.
that was
I
our
know you guys still have the
distinction.
deputy system. Yeah. So
Yeah, it was just another Grange that did it.
so yeah, I mean, I think that it's not unusual that we see people who are making choices to the alternative, even shortening that further. But we're hearing a lot also, just like you said, Rob, of people who are walking away from doing it, and then the structure of what the meeting is seems to fail. Either because there's not a defined start and stop in ways that people just snap into a completely different mindset of the put the phone down and the have a civil conversation, that hopefully these first words that we're saying and these last words that we're saying are reminding them of, and getting them ready for the process. More than that, I think we also have taken a step back from some of the parliamentary procedure, which, let's be honest, if anybody has read Robert's Rules of Order, which is about this long and probably one of the densest reads you can get, that feels a little like tax code, where you're like, okay, if A, then B on page 942, and then, okay, if B, then C on page 12. And you're constantly going back and forth in this thing. But basic Parley Pro says the order of how motions are done, the expectation of who speaks and kind of in what order for how long with what expectations on that. And it really allows us to frame the discussions that are happening in the Grange in a way that are productive in getting us to an end. And that is actually a key piece that's not written as our ritual, but our ritual stands against. It's kind of like our ritual is leaning on a wall. And as we walked away from some of the expectation that people understand some of the basic meeting order or Parley Pro, that wall has eroded and people are kind of falling further and further over the cliff. And so while we labeled this tonight as ritual, kind of then and now ideas, I think that was an important piece also to hit, is that when we talk about some of our ritual and our meetings, not so much our expectations of character, and expectations of understanding some of our basic tenets that our degrees really set up. Ritual has to go hand in hand with the Parley Pro piece. So when we're looking, I think, at where ritual fits today, especially again for that meeting forward stuff, we also need to be talking about what makes a successful meeting, and where we are short shrifting some of that, or where we can enhance some of that and match it with the expectation of people today. The other part of ritual is that there's a question about how much or how little can or should be part of anything that's happening as perhaps a committee meeting, or something else that is considered official business of that Grange. And so I don't know how many of you have run against questions or had questions tossed to you about any particular expectation of how a committee meeting runs, or how extra official business should be run. But I know that that's something, that question that I get often. I think that's an important part of understanding where we fit, because people do see if we have a structure, then we should have a structure throughout what we're doing in our business. and our committee meetings, or even what might happen on an online session to do a quick vote or a quick poll that would lead to a vote. Some of these things are pieces that Granges are doing, whether we want to push the bylaws and the boundaries and talk about that or not. And so there needs to be some expectation that the structural pieces of what we're doing are going with that in some way. That not everyone, can take, or not one person can't take over those extra committee meetings by voicing only their opinion and not listening to others, where there may be some specific call to order and even in a virtual setting, that people understand that there's a specific motion or movement happening. And so as you guys are sitting, especially as Grange leaders in some of your states, or as leaders in your community Granges, one of the things that I think would be really important and appropriate for you to do is kind of set the tone for what those committee or alternative interactions that are Grange related look like, and what the expectations are on the conduct and the character of the discussions and debate. Additionally, what should be captured in writing, because we know that minutes are supposed to be taken at a lot of these things, and that's not quite happening. While there's nothing in our manual, it's certainly something for you to be able to set a tone of expectation. And so I wanted to open a quick discussion about how you feel like Granges that are using, especially these committees, which we've had forever. This is not a new thing, and it's not, just for the community Granges, the alternative Granges. How those committees and meetings that they're having can be enhanced by having some piece of a more formal Grange presence in them. Have you guys run against any of that or talked to anyone about any of that? John, I know you've got some Granges working in committees.
So we had we had our day of learning a month ago, and Grange Meetings 102 was one of our topics. And thanks to Tom's presentation last year at the President's Conference, I used some of that information to not scare the Granges, but basically say you need to have a little more form to your meeting than just sitting around the table and say, okay, let's get started. I think most of our Granges, as I travel around the state, kind of they have committees, but they kind of just hash everything out at the meeting. I don't know how many really have committees that meet between meetings. They just kind of, like, I was at Pioneer the other night, and they're having a mental health awareness seminar in May, and they just kind of brought everything up and decided it as a group. And there's a little core committee that's kind of guiding the person that's running it, but I think she wants everybody involved. She wants the whole Grange to have a say in it. So that works for them, but that won't work somewhere else in New Jersey, and that won't necessarily work in California, New York, wherever.
Anybody else have committees that you've had some discussion with?
Yeah, we actually, again, finding it with new people coming in, is that we work committees and everything. Basically, the people who come to the meetings act as it might be one representative of each committee, because of modern day life being a little crazy. But we're really strong on having the minutes, and the minutes go out to everybody every month, a couple days after the thing, so people continue working on it. So we find it works really well.
Thanks, Kathy. Heidi, I saw your hand up.
Well, mine's is a little different. Like in my Pomona, what we do is we actually meet like in the morning of our Pomona, and we actually go through like all the legislative stuff. And we kind of like go over all the resolutions that have come in throughout the Granges. And then we kind of vote on it somewhat not in session. And then we'll open up and make it all official in the meeting. but we set up the morning just to do legislative stuff. And then when it's all come, we've already done the chit chatting of all the debates. We've already hashed it all out, but.
That sounds a lot like national session, because they have their committees, right, that do work on resolutions. They've chatted about it, they've researched it, they've argued about it, and now they're bringing a suggestion to the floor. So that makes sense. The reason that also that I brought this up, and it's kind of a shame that I don't see really anybody from one of the states that has the Grange Youth Fair program, is because one piece, and Kathy, you really kind of hit the nail on the head in some ways when you said the way modern life is today. In some of these Granges, there are members who may come to the first meeting to get initiated or, welcomed or whatever, but they may never make it to that meeting where they get to actually vote as a full member on a specific issue, be in what we consider those Grange meetings. They might just come to their club or committee activities, and at those make some recommendations like Kathy's committees are doing, or like your committees are doing at the Pomona level, Heidi. And at the Thursday night meeting or whatever of the Grange, there's only a representative from that club or group or committee, and there's not the full integration of some of those members with Grange as it is that we normally think about, the gaveling in, gaveling out, specific order of business words, etc. We know that people, sometimes are oriented towards just maybe one thing that we're doing, since Grange has so many tentacles. They might just be about the dictionary project and that's all they want to do, or just be about the Lamb Club and that's all they want to do. But sometimes that means they're missing out on some of the other things that are essential to being Grange. And so finding ways to make sure to, even if it is, taking a moment to say a very similar prayer to what we open our meetings with, or taking a moment to do the Pledge of Allegiance, or, calling the meeting to order with a few specific words that are very reminiscent of what we call our Grange meetings to order with, could be a way to integrate what those folks are seeing who are just making it to their committee or club meetings. And so when and if they ever do kind of get to cross over and have a Thursday night available and they go to Grange meetings, it's not so foreign. And they're not so surprised about what they are actually participating in. So that was one thing that I think was a kind of important comment to think about, as you may have committees becoming a stronger piece of your Grange puzzle, which I think is really within the modern spectrum of how groups are meeting, especially if their committees are meeting virtually or without very specific time constraints, like 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. They might have a discussion group that you could interact as you're available. So then the second part is, okay, there's ritual in our meetings, but then there's also ritual as far as the degree work and the things that we think of almost secondarily now, but were really the first and entry work to Grange. And so obviously most people who are coming into Granges and start having a momentary pause and are sending the initial email within their first few months of membership to me or to someone who's been sitting in this position, is often talking about what's happening in their meetings. But wow, are they in for a surprise when they get to the degree day, right? Which they may or may not ever attend. So then the question becomes, we know that even in some of our strongest states, it's been very hard to get degree days together. And the idea of forcing attendance or expelling someone if they don't see the degrees in the first year really is only something that I've ever heard in one state in today's Grange. And good, bad, or indifferent, we know that there are many folks who have been members, maybe even 7th degree members, who have never seen 1 through 4. So the question, I think, is, where does ritual fall, not just in our own priorities for today, but in the view or the eyes of people who are coming into Grange and have accepted or adopted the ideas of what a Grange is, without having yet interacted with that. I know most of you here, that I can see are generational members or have been in Grange a long, long time. So these questions may never have popped out to you, but I know that we've all had these discussions and you know that these questions pop out to other folks. So in that spirit, kind of in that vein, I don't know. Have you come up with ideas of ways that these could be really presented and encouraged that you think you could share with the group? Because I don't want to just take over my time. I certainly don't have all the answers to this. But do any of you have any ideas or suggestions or things that you've used locally to either make them more appealing to potential new members or to get folks to want to put these on more often?
Amanda, I do. This is Lynette.
Lynette, I was in your state 3 days before COVID shut down the world, I think it was.
Yes.
And I remember distinctly at one of your meetings, somebody saying, when was the last time we had a degree day in this state? And someone else said, I don't know, it's probably been about 20 years. And so I would love to hear your suggestion because I know you sat there and you were doing the math. Wait, no, we had it in. And so I think we were both shocked, right? So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your suggestion.
The way Illinois is physically, we have Granges in South Central and we have the majority of the Granges in the North. So doing them together just doesn't work so well. But we had one recently for the 8 Granges in our county, did all 4, but we had pretty good attendance by people like you were mentioning that may have been members for 10 years and hadn't seen the degrees, know Grange pretty well, but hadn't seen the degrees. So what we did is we had the officers sit and we had the assistants march. And yes, we did all the other speaking parts along the way, but there was no marching of the candidates. We'd bring them up to the altar we did the obligation in the 1st and the 4th, since we were doing them all the same time. We didn't do the obligation each time. And those that have been members for, so it took us 2.5 hours, which was not bad because
That's not bad at all.
we took little breaks in between, you know, if you needed to get up and go to the bathroom during that time or whatever, while we changed officers and everything. It went really well. And those that had been members for 10 years were like, oh, it makes more sense to me now that they had seen the degree stuff. And those that were brand new really enjoyed it. And some of them were teenagers, which I thought was good on their part to spend the afternoon with us and then to enjoy it. And then a whole bunch of people, though, that have been seasoned members thought it was really good to do it on a more regular basis. So we're going to try in our county anyway, to about every other year or so, to do all 4 of them in the afternoon that we did. And yes, we did start with a potluck, which helped to bring more people in as well. But it worked out real
Can't
well.
have a Grange function without food, without a potluck. You can't. It's just impossible. That's also where we get all of our chit chat out, right? So we can get to the business, I think. So that's really good. I'm excited to hear that it went well, and I'm really excited about the idea that you modernized it in just a tiny little bit of a way, right? But you held really fast to what the history and tradition is. So that's a great suggestion. Anybody else? Phil, your county does this every year.
We do, but we're pretty traditional with it.
You guys are.
And
you guys include hoodwinks still. You're
no, we don't anymore. We do not anymore. So we because we took some time off during COVID, we didn't do them in 2020 or 2021. Last year we had basically a whole new crew of officers doing the first 4 degrees and the 5th degree. So we had to stop and rethink some things, and we like, well, this is how we used to do it, but we don't have the right people here. The person that used to do this isn't here. So we're rethinking them, and actually it's part of our Pomona discussion in a broader context about how often they should be done and is obligation versus doing the degrees all the time, and making them more worthwhile for people to attend.
I think that's another really good point, Phil, is whether or not we want to admit it, most people now of all age groups are doing a mental calculation of return on investment, ROI. I like to use that acronym a lot. What's our ROI on fill in the blank? If I know that I'm giving you 4 hours, let's say, between a potluck and chit chatting afterwards and going and seeing the 4 degrees, what is the thing that I'm getting back from that? And so it is a hard question to answer when some folks see it as a completely and totally distinct event from and experience from what they have as their Grange experience to go and see and do degrees. If they don't feel as if the two are related, because in Grange, we talk about our milkshake booth and we talk about our dictionaries and we, argue about the paint color of the kitchen. And then we go do this really weird day where people are walking around and saying stuff that feels almost Shakespearean, right? And ne'er the two shall meet. The return on investment as a member may not be seen, especially if there's not a lot of connection. But also if, for example, there's no promotability, right? I never saw the degrees, and yet I'm the president of our local Grange. I have seen them 4 times and I can barely get elected, as gatekeeper. That's probably a problem on my part, but but there's a question about when we have these things that are not integrated or they don't feel like they kind of speak to one another, how relevant they are. In addition, we have these ideas and principles that guide us that people who are coming into the organization may not see, hear, or read at any particular time. And then those folks are making decisions, not just about the organization as far as who we are, what we look like, what we're doing, but also who else is coming in. I know I was making decisions about whether or not somebody should be a member, having never seen some of those things or read some of those things the first few months that I was a Grange member. And so if those things tell us what it is to be a person of good moral character and what it is to embody this idea of being a Granger, how do we know that we're going a course that continues the tradition of what's expected of that actual word, term, or idea? And this is where I think I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about the heirloom program. Year and a half ago or so is when we put this program out. And the idea was to allow all Grangers to be introduced or encouraged to somehow interact with a snippet a month of our Grange documents or foundational materials like the degrees, or some of the things from our opening and closing, or our declaration of purposes, things that we really can trace very, very directly to our founding fathers and mothers, our original stakeholders in this organization, and some of those original ideas and where we came from, right? So Phil has a link up to our Google Drive that he'll share, but he can also bring it up on the screen.
I just dropped that in the chat, but
There we go.
we're gonna
The program provides one small phrase each month that Grange members can do what they want with, kind of in a way. It is over the course of 5 years, because after 12 years in this organization, I'm still not 100% sure that everybody, knows the first thing that I put out when I came on board, let alone the last thing. It takes a long time sometimes to communicate things down to Granges. And this also allows people to jump in wherever they are and then continue the program on and on and on, kind of in perpetuity. If you're part of a church that, all the Lutherans on the third Sunday of January are probably learning about, John chapter 3, verse 16, every Lutheran in the country is probably learning about that. It's similar idea for the heirloom program, that hopefully most or every Grange in the country would be talking or touching a specific subject that month. And so we are in year B, which Phil's going to open. And he can open the brochure there. And you'll see this is April. So in theory, most Granges would be either through their lecturer, through one of their members. In this case, maybe the steward would take a moment, maybe during good of the order, maybe during the conferring of the degrees, when you're looking at the order of business, that thing that Rob talked about being really important as a way to keep the Grange meeting moving on and on. And that person would maybe read, provide an activity or something to remind people of this statement. Those we admit into our circle are not chosen by outward appearance, and we are not deceived by display and dress. It is to the mind and heart that we look for all good works. Therefore, in your intercourse with the world, remember that the noble mind and generous heart are often concealed beneath the garments of poverty. They may want to shorten that says, in your intercourse with the world, remember that noble mind and generous hearts are often concealed beneath the garments of poverty. They would like. But the idea is that throughout the course of going to your meetings regularly, over several years, just as a general member, you're going to get an introduction to some of these things that if you then hear during a degree day, or you might hear someone else just drop a quote or phrase that they like, that they remember from degrees or declarations of purpose or whatever, it's connecting the dots for them and making these things part of the entire Grange experience. Maybe it's framing for them the idea of why we do more outreach for people who are in need. Maybe it's framing for them the idea of why we pay attention to educational activities or programs, because that was one of our founding ideas. Maybe it makes them understand a little more, or even ask questions a little more about the history of our inclusion of women. Whatever it is, it's giving the opportunity to have some more of these conversations about the foundational stuff that doesn't always have to happen during our meetings. Hopefully the conversations are happening with people that they've found to be friends and mentors. So if we read this week in our meeting, one of the folks may, call me up afterwards and say, I really liked that. And that gave me an idea for a service project. It made me wonder where this idea came from. It made me think more about why the steward would say that. What was their role really? And allow you to open up a conversation into not only what some of the ritual says, and hopefully be able to hand them a copy of that, and they might read the whole thing themselves before seeing the actual degrees, but what the Grange stands for and kind of where some of this stuff comes from. Have any of you guys used this? Phil, you can close it if you want, and we can go back to full screen for a few minutes. And then I'll have him talk about how to get here and how else to use some of these pieces. But have any of you guys used this at all in any of your Grange stuff? Dwayne Scott.
Yep.
Dwayne Scott is making an appearance. I don't think that means he's trying to talk to us, though.
So, Amanda, I saw somebody use this a couple months ago. I attended a Grange that I don't normally go to, and they used it in the spot where they would typically introduce honored guests, saying, because we don't have an honored guest tonight, we do have a bit of Grange ritual that we want to provide. And it was just a really nice way of kind of launching into the meeting. So moving from the ritualistic opening into the work of the Grange. And it was a nice kind of transition in that way.
You know, and also kind of, I mean, you think about some of these words came directly from our founders and earliest members, those people who really built the Grange into something. It's as if you made them, the authors of this, the people who have spoken it for a number of years and stuff, the honored guest in that meeting, even though they're not there. That's kind of, I mean, symbolically, I think that's pretty cool.
I'm going to talk a little bit here at the end about an article Betsy sent me a year ago, but it is about connecting. Ritual is about connecting our present day to the past. There are things that have been done for generations and generations. And so it is a really cool way to honor our history by kind of making them that honored guest role.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. That's a really great idea. Heidi, I saw you say yes. Vic, I saw in the chat, you guys recently did it. Lynette, Tina, you said that Russellville is using these. Joan, I know that we're getting to do these in Potomac. Dawn's got them in Connecticut. Eileen in Idaho, you guys are doing them. Is there anybody who this is the first time hearing about this that you feel like more explanation might be necessary, even if it's after this full forum? We could do that.
Amanda?
Heidi.
I mean, I didn't use mine in the Grange forum per se. Is what I did last year is because I'm in charge of our Grange building. It's our state fair. So I actually included little quotes from each thing. And like this year, I'm already putting, this year is going to be a quote each day from.
Nice.
Is what I'm going to do. And that's what I did last year. And I was hoping it would attract new people. And I said, because there's the 4 years, I go, oh, I've got one display done for the next 4 years.
Yeah, you've got a little while yet. That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. Anybody else try to use these in a unique way? So I think that there are a lot of pieces of our ritual and of our, you know, our degrees or our opening, closing, those different things that are really important to the Grange that can make people think differently, not just about our organization when they're in it, but about what they believe we are. Because how many of you have heard we're just a bunch of old farmers, or we're only a group who deals with maybe dictionaries or broadband or fill in the blank what your local Grange really does for your community that shines. Carrie's Grange is really just a great, and Phil's are really just fairs, right? You're not actually anything other than, you know, a once a year event or a property maybe. So I think it allows us to also show the community what we are beyond those very small ideas of Grange. It's hard sometimes, I think, for me to wrap my head around how big Grange is as an idea from the beginning. Sometimes I think I get this idea that, you know, we fractured off into this and that over a number of years, but really when you go back, you see from the very beginning, they wanted us to be an organization that could educate, that could inspire, you know, leadership, that could create a place that it was safe and welcoming for talents and skills to be, you know, showcased, to do this legislative work, this policy work, to be a social catalyst in ways. And so silly thing, I guess, to think that we've grown all these tentacles because we aren't quite sure of who we were. I think there was such a defined idea of how Grange could be so much, so pervasive and so bring so much good to people's lives from the very beginning, that all of these things have just sprung up kind of as twigs and leaves off these branches that were given to us from our founders. But knowing that, I can't know every twig and branch and leaf of a tree. I can't. I can love that tree as a whole though, right? and I can really like sitting on a specific branch, and I can really, enjoy seeing a specific leaf take shape and turn colors. I can appreciate from afar, the bigger picture, but I think we all kind of get ourselves saddled into one area that really speaks to us, that we can pay so much attention to, and truly, enrich and nourish. And so as we're seeing people who are coming into Grange, and they're coming in because they really liked that one program, that one project, that one thing that we are or we do, it's it's important, I think, to then say, okay, that's a little leaf or a little twig off of a bigger branch. And then that comes into this trunk, and here are the many, many things and the roots where it comes, and really trying to give people a picture of the Grange as this much larger object, this much bigger tree, that sustains a whole bunch of projects, programs, the life of a community in some ways. That's our challenge. And I think ritual helps us understand then that these aren't disparate things, that the Grange is not lost because it's got so many things going on with it, that actually the so many things were a planned event. And we are fulfilling that destiny in a lot of ways. So I think today it's almost more important than ever that we're finding ways to connect those things, and make them exciting or interesting for people to go and do in their everyday meetings, and then go and see as special events, and tie them together, so that it can and truly, give us this full picture. I know that might be a little more philosophical than you thought you were going to get into tonight, but I'm hoping it's kind of food for thought, as to why these pieces are still super important to what we do. That said, I want to address one thing. Nothing in Grange, just like nothing in nature, is so set, that we cannot change it. There may be pieces of this ritual, written or unwritten, that at some point we decide as a collective that changing is not doing away with where we came from, but honoring the ideas that were present in a modern way.
Mhm.
I'm going to use something that is a little outside for a moment, but for those of you who are members to this degree, you're going to hear about it anyway. We talked about the sign of the 6th degree last year. Now, all of you know that there are signs and symbols and knocks and handshakes for the degrees. You were told that. So even if you're a 4th degree member only right now, I'm not spilling any secrets. There are indeed signs, symbols, knocks, handshakes for the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, right? So last year, the folks who are part of our assembly, which means they're our current or past delegates to the National Grange, voting delegates to the National Grange, had a discussion and had to talk about whether or not the sign of that degree was appropriate, given current interpretations of it. And those delegates chose to change something that has been in place for well over 100 years. There was questions of whether that was bowing to pressure. There was questions of whether or not that would make us weaker because we were causing or we were giving in, and we were changing. There was questions as to whether or not that would cause people to not be able to get in and see the full privilege of what they would be able to with the 6th degree, because they may not know that it has changed. And it was a whole lot of discussion that ended with a change. So everything that we're talking about today, we're talking about the idea of ritual, the idea of a structure, the idea of passing on our values, and the idea of doing so in a way that really is part of a larger tradition. but that may mean that we are doing or saying it differently tomorrow or 10 years from now or 100 years from now. So when I'm talking tonight about, and I hope that you just generally know, when I'm talking about, Grange ritual and tradition, I am not saying that what is in the book today is the only thing that could ever be acceptable. It's what's in the book after we as a group have voted on our delegates, who voted on their delegates, who voted on their delegates in some cases to go and decide whether or not it was acceptable. And it still conveyed the same message. Because the answer, I think at the end of the day, was the sign that the 6th degree had didn't convey the same message for almost anybody in today's society that we wanted it to. And so a change was necessary. So if there's something in that ritual or in the way in which we, open, close, present degree work that doesn't ring true to you for some reason, and you are tracing kind of your ideas back to what some of our foundational concepts were that I would consider of equity and of space for people that, help us have food security and all of those wonderful things that Grange was, you can make those changes via the correct and appropriate process. Or, if you're dropping something, changing something minor and speaking to your state president about it, there's also possibilities of doing something there. But I just wanted to, I guess, point out that ritual in general, important. Ritual as it is presented doesn't always mean it's written in stone. But that's up to you guys to make choices on through our process. So Phil, you were going to talk to us a little bit about how to get to some of those resource materials from the heirloom program.
Sure
And
thing.
then you're going to add a couple other little things about some of Betsy's wisdom. She has a lot of it, so it's good to
Sure
sometimes highlight what we might have forgotten since the next ones have come out.
Okay, so to get to the Grange heirloom materials, it's a very short link, bit.ly/Grange heirloom. We tried to keep it as simple as possible, which brings you to our Google Drive, which looks like this. And this is organized by year. So here on the front page is information that's good for all years. If you're brand new to the heirloom program, you can watch this lovely video we did with Amanda last year, which I'm so sorry about that freeze frame. This first document has all 5 years of the heirloom brochures there. The heirloom logo, whatever you want to use. So we're in year B, so everything is sorted by year. And I will admit that apart from the brochures, we don't have anything ready for years C through E, so don't start using those yet. But in year B, I'm actually going to take us to this document first. So every month we've put together a social media post, a Facebook header, and a poster that you're able to use. And this document gives you some suggested text for when you post, gives you some suggested dates. These kind of things are put out by a lot of other organizations for just general social media kits, toolkits, different things that you can use. So this month, or for every month, the social media post is suggested text is just the text of the month. The header, because it's up longer, representing your Grange, because I suggest that you change it on the first of every month, kind of gives a little more context to the reasons that these quotes were chosen, and gives a little more information. So next month, May, the quote is about the social relationship and the destiny between man and women. So for the little more context, for May 1st, says the National Grange has long championed women as equal to men, including being the first fraternal organization to ensure women are heard equally. Since 1867, the Grange has guaranteed that women must be a part of chartering each Grange, and there are 4 offices in the Grange which can only be held by women. And that's out there just to give a little more context for anyone who's coming across your Grange, who's seeing these quotes, to say, why is that the quote that was chosen? So when they click on your Facebook header, they see that kind of as the text that goes along with it. You're, of course, welcome to not use anything that I have written and write something yourself, and that's a-okay. I don't mind. So in year B, everything is sorted. Then you can get to all the assets together, or you can go in month by month. So we are currently in spring. We're going to look at next month, which is May, so you can all get there. And this is just jumping folder to folder really easily. And so Heidi, for example, talking about, putting these things up in your fair building, you can just print off these lovely posters that were designed, and they're designed at 8.5 by 11. If you want something to be a different size, you are welcome to message me and I will do what I can to make it a larger printable size. If you're getting these things printed on like large format at Staples or whatever you need, I'm certainly willing to help you get things resized. So this is the poster version of it, which prints off very nicely on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I've seen a couple of these hanging in Grange halls and different offices. And then the header is designed to fit into the Facebook header space. And the third one is the social media post, which is designed in a square to make it more Instagram friendly as well. So you can use this one on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok, wherever you want to post this, go right ahead. And these are all just designed to kind of draw people in. So one thing that I intentionally didn't do when I designed them this year is to use pictures of anybody familiar. And I really don't try not to use a ton of faces either, to kind of make this an everyman kind of situation that everybody can look into this and feel connected to it in some way. So that's just, this is the assets that we have. Year A is all available, anything if you want to go back
Bill?
at some point. Yes.
A comment on it would
Yes,
be
Joe.
on these three options, the word
Mhm.
Grange doesn't appear on it. So perhaps someplace on it in the future, we could, the emblem is there under the heritage program, but if you're not a Granger, you're not going to pick that up. That it might be helpful if we someplace put National Grange or something, just a comment.
Sure, I'll take that into consideration.
Yeah.
It's never occurred to me. So yeah, so all of these are available to use. In the all assets program, these are put in as zip folders. So when you download, you do have to unzip them. But this is a way, if you want all of the posters or all of the Facebook headers or all of the social media posts at once without having to go in folder by folder, this is the best way to do that. Every computer now is equipped with some way to unzip these folders. And this is just a way to keep them manageable. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out was really, it was almost exactly a year ago that Betsy sent me this article, which comes from a group called Earth Conscious Life. So they're talking about ritual in a way of healing and connecting with one another. And that's really, so this is in the April 22nd, 2022 patrons chain, which I can share with you all. But this article I also ran in Good Day in the June edition of last year, I think. Just talks about, how we use rituals in a lot of ways in our life without thinking about it, without even recognizing that it is a ritual. Think about brushing your teeth at night, the way that you get ready for bed, the way that you make your coffee in the morning. These are all rituals that we partake in everyday life that we don't put a lot of stock in until something changes. When suddenly things aren't the way that they were, when it takes an extra beat to get something done, you're suddenly like, wait, why is this different? And I think, to me, that's how I feel about Grange meetings too, is that the ritual that we do, even if it's just reading through the opening because you don't have the people who can walk all the parts, you don't have the people who can really do it in full form, even if it's just saying the words, it gets you in the Grange state of mind and connects you all. So it's the one thing that, whether you're doing the alternative opening whether you're, in full form every time. It's the one thing that every Grange across the country does or should be doing. And it's the one thing that really unites us as a fraternal organization and really keeps us together. And it's something that's been done in some shape or form since 1867. I know I own several old manuals just because I think it's really neat to kind of track little changes that have been made over time, so that we can kind of follow these things through and see how the order that we belong to today is exactly what our founders intended it to be. And we still use the words in many cases that were used 155 years ago. And I just think that's really neat because there's not a lot of people besides religion, I guess, that can say that. So that's all I wanted to say about where I stand on ritual. But this article is great. Go ahead, take a moment to read it. I'm going to share this link in the chat box for you all, and enjoy.
So it's been an hour, and I don't love going too far over that because I know that you all have lives, and I try to have one occasionally. So I guess I'll do that tonight. But I did want to stop and just ask if you had any comments or ideas or questions that we didn't cover, and if there's anything specific that you would like to toss out as suggestions that other Grangers might be able to use for getting folks to embrace ritual, especially folks, I think it's interesting, especially folks that may have grown up with it or have been doing it for a number of years who seem to have lost passion along the way, to get them to be excited about this again. So. Wayne Scott, I'm going to call on you because I quite remember it's taken me a long time to appreciate ritual, and you would be the first person who ever saw me really rail against it when we sat together at the Pennsylvania session my first year. And I leaned over to you after watching the 6th Degree and said, that's a half an hour of my life I'll never get back. And partially it was because I felt like the people who were putting it on didn't do it with any type of passion. So why should I be passionate about it? So I'll call on you to ask you if you have any suggestions.
If I had any answers, I probably would have implemented them in the last 40 years, but it's hard for me. I mean, I'm one of those Grangers that I grew up in the Grange. My first Grange meeting, I was 2 weeks old, my mom told me. So, it's hard.
You don't remember?
I don't remember. It's hard to explain what the ritual, what the Grange and the ritual means to you in your life, that way than trying to tell new people who have absolutely no idea. Mm-hmm. And I also have, members of my Grange, which have been members for years and years, 50 years or more, and they just don't care anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to get them motivated to do things. Mm-hmm. And we own a building. Our building is 150, but it'll be 150 years old next year. Our Grange was organized 150 years ago this February. I've been talking for 2 years about we need to do something for it, and I'm still the only one talking about it. So it's hard. But for me, my Grange family is the Grange people that are here on the Zoom tonight, and the people I see at National. I have better Grange friends that I see once or twice a year, but I connect with more on Facebook that are around the country than are my Grange members who sit in the Grange Hall with me every month at our meeting.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing to hear is that the folks who have been in it for 50 years just have lost the passion.
What we found, because even though everybody is fairly new to the Grange, mm-hmm. everyone wants to know the ritual. Mm-hmm. And even though several of us went through the degrees, it actually has made more sense to everybody. What we do is read one degree at a time and talk about it, sure, which has really helped. And people who went through the others was like, oh, that was what it was about. So I think it's good to read it and then do it.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion too, is I understood the degrees a lot more after I read them.
Okay.
I took my first 4 degrees. I was marching candidate as a 14-year-old. That was a lot of information to digest audibly in 2.5 hours. So I was able to understand a lot more when I actually was given a manual and was able to sit down and read through the degrees and understand what the lecturer says in one of their long paragraphs, and to understand the role that the steward plays in the Grange, and to understand what everybody's position is. And I think that's what I love about the heirloom program, is you're given these small bites of a little bit at a time. And it just makes it more approachable. And it's a way to, for me, especially for new members, especially if you're not able to do the degrees in full, to be able to kind of sit down and talk through little bits at a time and kind of say, this is what connects us all, and this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Anybody else?
Amanda, it's
Yes.
Dawn. One of the things that I will say about the heirloom, this whole thing, and what I like about it, is when we used to do degrees, and we did the first and second, and then the third and fourth on another night. So we didn't have 4 degrees all at once. But we had a member that she was really good at making displays. And she would take, just like what you've done for this project, just one quote from one of those degrees, and she would actually make a tableau about it. And what I found was the members coming in would you might not remember all of it, because you're right, not everybody is acting out the part, and really, to me, it should be acted out, because it means so much more when it's acted out rather than just read or said. But by taking that little bit, they would leave at least with a snapshot of something that they remembered. And she changed it up every year, so it was not always the same tableau. In November, she would have in April for the 2 degrees. So it was just kind of like what you're doing. And that's one thing I think that we're getting when I present it to members in Riverton. And I do it mostly because of, George and Sharon have done the degrees, but when we look around who's there at our meetings all the time, I'm the only one that's really done the degrees.
Right.
That's left there.
Right.
And it does make a difference.
Right. I love the idea. I'll tell you, I'd pitched this idea originally to do some type of contest with this, but there's a lot of discussion about contests in general for us. Some of it's, the financial, and some of it's the lack of participation. And in this case, also, some of it was just, I don't know how you would transport some of these things. But one of the ideas was, to have a contest for every month's lesson, with the best way that it was presented. And that might have been a tableau, or it might have been, something unique on social media, or it might have been a little skit that somebody put together, about seeing people beyond just their, outward appearance or something like that. And I still love the idea of getting creative with these. I don't think it lends itself to the contest part in my head, maybe. Unless it was maybe on a state level, but I love the idea, Dawn, of taking these things and getting creative with them. Heidi's doing it with, putting these in her displays. I think that these snippets just lend themselves so much to doing something with them, whether it's, tying it in with a lecturer's program, having a pop-up community service project, whatever it is, just, even down to one of the example program elements that I gave last year was like a watercolor or adult coloring page that should have, been colored like an agate. for the corresponding phrase. I would love to see you get creative with this, or, whatever. It would be so cool. And I think there's so many ways that people could then engage with the statements more than just hearing them, more than just kind of thinking how they apply, but really, taking some time to make them whole in a way. So if you get into that, you got to let me know.
Well, we also get into the history of it because, again, like Phil says, I've read different manuals from different years. And I've come across different year ones, and there's little snippets about how the first 4 degrees was put on and who was wearing what. And you're thinking, okay, now that's what it really means. So it's been a nice way to tie in. Why are we sitting around the outside, which a lot of people don't understand what the whole setup is for it. And we've been able to tie in a little bit of the Grange history with all these other little ones too, which has been good.
And I also, I guess, hope that at the end of the day, we're also reminded that when a new person comes in, they're starting from 0. This isn't like when a kid transfers into 3rd grade, they've already had kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and part of 3rd, right? They're coming in as kindergartners, and you might be, an undergraduate student at that moment, right? You might have your master's degree in Grange at that point, but you have to figure out a way to translate your subject matter to kindergartner. And then they're not going to go from being a kindergartner to a master's degree student. They're going to become a 1st grader and then a 2nd grader. And we forget, especially when somebody's been in for a couple of months, like, oh, they know everything now. And I'm guilty also, totally guilty of that. And so, I guess the other part is I hope to see us figure out a way to make sure we're constantly educating, but not in like a, you're talking to a kindergartner type way. So yeah. All right. Well, it's 9:45 my time. So that means it's earlier or later for some, well, earlier, not later for any of you. But it's earlier for some of you. I'm happy to stick around tonight for a little while and chit chat about this or other things. I hope that we've given you kind of some other ways to think and talk about ritual. And just generally hope that you had a good night with us. Thanks again. I said it earlier when Joan was not on, to Potomac for their signature sponsorship of the Membership Leadership Fellows Program. I'm looking forward to getting information out about that. And hopefully maybe some of you are interested or know someone who would be a good person to apply, and will hold their hand a little through that process. And otherwise, tomorrow, Phil, we're doing what? Friendship Day, right?
Oh, I should have looked at that ahead of time. I looked at a bunch of other things before we got on. Yesterday was Friendship Day.
Oh.
Tomorrow
I missed it.
is something.
Serving with passion, Christine.
Oh,
No, that's Wednesday night. Tomorrow night we are
Is that
off.
tomorrow?
yeah,
Oh.
tomorrow night we don't have a Zoom meeting, but I'm hoping that you will jump on your social
Ooh.
media.
Tomorrow is Grange Apparel or Pin Day. I thought
Okay.
that's what it was.
So hopefully you'll jump on social media tomorrow and you will post a picture of your favorite Grange apparel, you in it, maybe even. Hopefully my favorite Grange apparel will be out of the wash. And not inappropriately marked by my dogs. And so we'll have all kinds of photos to see and enjoy tomorrow. And I might even see shirts or hats or belts or pins that I've never seen before. That would be the cool thing here. But we hope you are enjoying Grange Month and
Yes.
participating.
So tomorrow night we are off on Zoom. I told Betsy this morning on our staff meeting to let people finish their taxes. That's tomorrow night. But then Wednesday night at 8:30, we are back with National Grange Vice President Chris Hamp, who's leading a conversation called Serving with Passion. On Thursday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, you're with me for a program called The Beginner's Mindset. On Friday night at 8:30, we have National Grange Community Service Director Pete Pomper leading the Community Service Forum, where he's going to be highlighting the work being done by Roy Grange in Washington, Keystone Grange in Pennsylvania, and Bainville Grange in Kansas. But also, of course, open to ideas from all over the country and spreading the community service work. And then next week, we have on Tuesday night, the Lecturers Forum. On Wednesday night, sponsored by the Grange Foundation 1 in 1,000 Club, we have long-term care and estate planning, which was a great program last year. So if you missed it, please tune in again because there's new information. Wednesday, of course, is also the Grange Virtual Fly-In. And then Thursday's the legislative roundtable with Burton Eller and Sean O'Neill from our legislative department. And finally, next Saturday, the last of our Zooms is 3 p.m. Eastern, so noon Pacific. And that's back with me again for a program called What's Next. So that's Grange Month. So thank you all for participating. It's been great to see so many faces. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yep. And don't forget to buy your Krispy Kreme donut dozen to support the Grange Foundation before the end of April. Even if you're not around a Krispy Kreme, maybe somebody you know is, and you'd like to give them the gift, the digital gift certificate, or maybe you'd just like to send it to me. I get near Krispy Kreme sometimes. I'm a fat girl who loves food. So, whoever you want to send it to, I'm sure they would appreciate if you are not nearby. But Grange Foundation would sure appreciate your support. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully I'll hear from all of you soon.